morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's online presentation for the launch of the EASO Asylum Report 2021. It's really a pleasure to have you here this morning. It is the 10th edition of the EASO Asylum Report. It also coincides with the 10th anniversary of EASO becoming operational. So it's a unique year for many reasons, also because it was a year of COVID. We're very happy to have 681 registrants today, which is a record for EASO, and I think it also reflects the importance that this annual report has taken in the world of asylum in the EU. My name is Anis Kassar. I'm the head of communications at EASO. I will just, before starting, run through today's events and introduce the panel. And so we will be starting, as you've seen on the agenda, with a video address from Commissioner Johansson. I'm passing on her apologies for not being able to join live. Unfortunately, she had important engagement which she couldn't turn down. We will then, after the video presentation, go to Mr. Michael Ribbenvik, who is the new chair of the EASO Management Board. And perhaps, Mr. Ribbenvik, you can just say hello so everybody can see you.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Looking forward to today's agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ribbenvik. Thank you. After that, the Executive Director of EASO, Ms. Nina Gregori, will begin with the introductory remarks on the report.
Thank you very much, Anis. Indeed, good morning to everyone.
And following Ms. Gregori, then we have two experts who are in charge of the two sectors which lead in the preparation of the asylum report. We have Mr. Teddy Wilkin, who is the head of data analysis and research sector.
Good morning from my side. Thanks for joining.
And also Ms. Jadwiga Maczynska, who is the head of information and analysis sector.
Good morning. Hello.
Also, on behalf of the European Commission, we're very delighted to have Mr. Marius Rașcanu from DG Home, who will also be available to answer questions in the question and answer session at the end of the event. Mr. Rașcanu, maybe you can say hello.
Good morning, everyone from Brussels. Happy to be here indeed.
Thank you very much. And so, after the presentation, as I said, we will have a question and answer session. We do have, we had a lot of registrants, as I mentioned in the beginning. And in order to avoid any technical difficulties, we will be taking questions in writing. You can see the Slido functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. And we encourage you to please put your questions in the text box there. Also, if you can, click on the little icon of a person at the top right-hand side and change the name from anonymous by inserting your own name and ideally also your affiliation so that we know who is actually asking the question. That will help us know who we're speaking to. And then at the end, after the presentation, I will read out the questions and the panel will answer according to who best it's addressed. So without further ado, we can pass immediately to Commissioner Johansson's video address. We're very grateful to her for taking the time to prepare this message for the launch of the report.
Congratulations with your 10th annual asylum report. It's both informative and comprehensive, covering all aspects of asylum, migration management and refugee protection in all their full complexity, legally, socially, politically. Our policies must be based on facts, and this report provides those facts. It gives the analysis and insight we need to further develop our policies. You highlight several developments. The first is the impact of the pandemic. This has limited movement between countries and across borders. As a result, asylum applications dropped last year by more than 30% to 485,000 in total. 2/3 of applications were made in just 3 countries: Germany, France, and Spain. Irregular arrivals dropped as well by 13%. Far fewer people crossed the Mediterranean in the east and west, but 3 times as many people crossed in the center. And 8 times more people took the deadliest route across the Atlantic compared to the year before. So some member states had more work, not less, to do. At the same time, the virus also disrupted asylum procedures. And you, EASO personnel, stepped up to help member states face these challenges of the pandemic. How to interview someone if you can't meet face to face, how to provide interpretation, how to give people legal and practical assistance. These challenges complicated processes. They also made it harder to check that fundamental rights are being observed. I issued guidelines last year to keep asylum systems running and to uphold the right to asylum, and member states largely followed those. But it was due in a significant part to the assistance that you gave them. They adapted to the new reality of face masks, social distancing, and telework. They did so by digitalizing asylum procedures, using video interviews, moving asylum systems online. And I'm sure this helped to reduce backlogs and pending cases, which decreased by nearly 20% last year. I want us to hold on to these digital innovations. But we must also make sure that asylum seekers and refugees are not excluded by them. We need to make sure that lack of access to a computer does not become a barrier. We must put safeguards in place to ensure this. As you mentioned in your report, it's not only arrivals that dropped. So did the number of refugees moved to safety through resettlement. Last year, just over 10,000 people came to Europe this safe way. An impressive effort in COVID conditions, but a 60% drop all the same. With the global health situation improving gradually, the moment has come to relaunch resettlement. To do this, I want to create strong alliances between like-minded partners. We need more admission places to respond to consistently high needs. The EU, Canada, and the United States must together continue to play a leading role to protect refugees in close cooperation with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. That's why, in this 70th anniversary year of the Geneva Convention, I will organize a high-level resettlement forum on July the 9th, in joining forces to promote resettlement and other legal pathways worldwide. EASO will also have a key role to play. Increasing resettlement is part of a second key development you highlight in your report. And that is the new Pact on Migration and Asylum that I presented last September. A pact to manage asylum and migration in an orderly way, with comprehensive partnerships with third countries, to increase readmission, fight smuggling, and develop legal pathways, with fair and fast procedures, including at the EU border for those likely unfounded claims, and a binding framework for solidarity, so every EU member state does its bit. The pact is a comprehensive and balanced package. It's also a compromise. I am optimistic about Europe's ability to come to an agreement. There has not been loud applause, I have to admit. Pragmatism rarely gets applause. But no one has rejected the pact either. And recently we have proved that progress is possible. One thing is certain, EASO will play an essential role in implementing the pact. Last year alone, you conducted over 18,000 interviews in difficult corona conditions. You registered over 40% of asylum applications in Greece, Italy, Cyprus, and Malta. If you were a European country, you would rank 5th in terms of registrations. As an agency, you will be able to support member states even better. To help people in need, like the 14,000 unaccompanied minors that applied for asylum last year, and to uphold the right to asylum, with more possibilities to give technical assistance in the whole asylum procedures, and to support also third countries. And that really is essential to the success of the pact. Because we can only manage migration to Europe together with countries outside Europe. And I thank Nina and her team for this excellent report. This is Europe's reference point report on asylum. I will use it often. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Commissioner once again from our side for taking the time from her busy schedule to prepare this video for us, and also, of course, for her support and that of her team for EASO throughout this difficult year as well. So now we will pass on to the Chair of the Management Board, Mr. Michael Rubinvik, for his introductory statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a great honor and pleasure to be part of the unveiling of the 10th edition of the EASO Asylum Report 2021, the annual report on the situation of asylum in the EU. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of EASO becoming operational. Over these years, EASO's activities have significantly grown, including providing support to member states in information sharing and practical cooperation. As the center of expertise on asylum, EASO plays a key role in reporting factually, accurately, and concisely on developments in asylum in Europe. This is reflected in the scope of this report that spans over all relevant stages of the asylum procedures and brings together information from so many diverse sources. As the chair of the EASO Management Board, I can attest to the close cooperation between the agency and asylum administrations in member states. EASO's work and priorities are closely linked to practical needs of asylum authorities all over Europe, where EASO provides a platform for collaboration, joint initiatives, and practical solidarity through knowledge and expertise sharing. Up-to-date, reliable, and comprehensive information on developments in asylum is a necessary foundation for both long-term strategies and the daily work of asylum authorities. The EASO Asylum Report provides us with an overview of those key developments and prompts reflection on the functioning of the common European asylum system and how to further develop its fair and efficient functioning. It's a comprehensive reference document that reports on the state of play of asylum systems in Europe and the broader context of migration and fundamental rights. It can be consulted whenever an insight into a practice, policy, legislation, or case law is needed. As we discuss and shape together the future of asylum in Europe with a pact on migration and asylum, we remain committed to comprehensive evidence with facts driving the political direction and legislative developments. With so many participants gathered for this event today, it's clear this commitment is solid. In that spirit, I would like to thank you all for joining EASO today. Let's look together into the key asylum developments over 2020 and the way ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubinvik, for those introductory comments. And I think it's a very good segue into the next part of our program, which is the actual introduction of the main findings of the report. So I will pass the floor to Ms. Nina Grigori, the Executive Director of EASO.
Yes, thank you very much, Anis, and good morning again to all. I'm very, very happy that a record number of you have joined us today. 350 now connected, and as Anis said at the beginning, many more already also announced your presence. So this is really, really exciting for us, and I'm happy that I'm able and, of course, very enlightened to present this EASO Asylum report for 2021. It is definitely a proof and a testament to how the report has established itself over the last past 10 years. And I also, of course, want at the beginning to thank the Commissioner Johansson for very positive messages, and also to our chair of the Management Board, Mr. Ribbermik, for the kind words. As I speak, all of us in EASO are awaiting news on the outcome of the trilogue between European Parliament, Council and Commission this morning for the agreement which will hopefully finally establish the European Union Agency for Asylum, or so-called EUAA. This would not be only a political accomplishment that demonstrates that progress is possible even in such a challenging policy areas as migration and asylum, but also a significant practical development for us as an agency. If there is one message which really stands out from this year's asylum report, it is that COVID-19 has highlighted the strengths of the EU's asylum systems, but also exposed its weaknesses. The progress on the EUAA over the past 3 weeks and the pending agreement could not be more timely. The new mandate will enable the agency to move beyond the limits it is currently forced to work within. It will mean that we can become more operational and we can react quicker to the increasing requests from support of our member states. It will establish better safeguards for fundamental rights, expanded training and better tools which are increasingly relied on by national asylum authorities. Less than 2 weeks ago, the UNHCR announced that there are now a record number of displaced people in the world. This is a reminder to all of us about why building a European asylum system is so important. Current common European asylum system is not perfect. There are many challenges. Indeed, I do hope that an EUAA agreement, and hopefully still today, will be a catalyst for political progress on the other important reform proposal from the Commission. However, we should also remember that the common European asylum system is very unique, and with that, we are building the only multinational asylum system in the world. It is an unprecedented project, and it is no surprise that the eyes of so many, even outside and beyond Europe, are on the EU ability to succeed. Personally, I have no doubt that this is going to happen. And now turning to the report. As stated by Madam Commissioner, this flagship publication has evolved into the go-to source of information on asylum in Europe. The report is a unique resource, utilizing 1,200 sources to provide practitioners, policymakers, academics, as well as journalists and the public with a complete overview of the state of the EU's common asylum system. It is an annual report card on how the system is functioning. As in so many areas of public and private life, asylum systems were not spared from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic last year. Before passing to my colleagues for details on the main findings of the report, allow me to highlight a few points. The most obvious result of the pandemic was a direct impact on the number of applications lodged in the EU. In 2020, we saw the lowest number of applications received since 2013, decreasing by 32% from 2019. This does not mean that the numbers will remain low in the future. We know that globally there are still record numbers of persons in need of international protection, but they were simply not able to make it through Europe. The majority of applicants at 44% came from Asia, followed by Africa at 23% and the Americas, especially Latin America, at 21%. 64% were men, 36% women, and 10% of minors were unaccompanied. Of the almost 500,000 applications at the first instance, less than half decisions of those were positive, including national humanitarian protection, meaning that the overall recognition rate in the EU stood at 42%. To ensure business continuity during the pandemic, national asylum and reception systems had to adapt to guarantee access to procedure, organize registration and interviews, and also to adapt the social distancing and rules organizing in the reception in line with, of course, sanitary measures. I would also note that the pandemic particularly affected travel-dependent parts of SEAS, such as organizing resettlement, Dublin transfers, and returns to unsuccessful applicants. Supported by EASO, national administrations managed to adjust to the new circumstances, including by using remote modalities and digital technologies. Some of those new approaches are here to stay and will continue to transform the asylum and reception work in the future. Also, EASO adopted and swiftly stepped in to provide the specific and targeted support required under the circumstances throughout the operations, training, practical guidance and tools, and information analysis. We managed to keep operations working, and we now support all main member states of first arrival, namely Greece, Italy, Cyprus, Malta, and most recently, Spain. EASO also remained active on the ground, and for instance, we did help to relocate thousands of unaccompanied children from Greece to other member states. As at the beginning, Madam Commissioner mentioned, in 2020 was also a year when the European Commission offered a fresh start in the discussion on migration and on asylum. We are all looking forward to see the proposed new pact moving ahead. And with that, I would like to give the floor to my colleagues to walk you through the asylum report and present the key developments that shaped the asylum landscape in Europe in 2020. And based on this information, we will provide a glimpse into the developing trends and future needs. So Jaga, Teddy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We will now briefly present the key findings of the 2021 EASO Asylum Report that are comprehensively described and analyzed in detail in specific sections of the report that I would like to warmly invite you all to read. Apart from main trends in areas where significant legislative and policy developments occurred, you will note also a number of topics where attention was drawn precisely because of the lack of breakthrough developments to a large extent as the result of the pandemic. We kick off the presentation of the key findings by casting a look at developments at the EU level. Throughout 2020, migration and asylum naturally remained high on the EU political agenda as topics of broader social and political interest. Importantly, both of the presidencies of the Council of the European Union in 2020 included relevant priorities in their programs. The Croatian presidency placed a particular emphasis on a Europe that protects, a Europe that has a leading role in providing protection to people in need, whereas the German presidency worked towards a Europe of security and common values, underlining a vision of Europe remaining a place where people can be free and safe. While we saw an overall decrease in the number of arrivals at the EU external borders in 2020, behind the general drop, different trends emerged across migration routes into Europe. The Western and Eastern Mediterranean routes had fewer arrivals compared to 2019, while the Western African, Central Mediterranean and Western Balkan routes experienced increased arrivals. Against that backdrop, the EU continued to provide support for countries under pressure, while under the coordination of the Commission and with the assistance of EASO, relocations took place from Greece and following search and rescue operations in the Central Mediterranean, expressing member state solidarity towards each other. The EU also continued its cooperation with external actors to manage migratory pressures through a comprehensive approach based on partnerships. Importantly, the activities implemented under the external dimension of the EU migration policy aimed at addressing the root causes of migration, combating smuggling networks, enhancing cooperation with third countries on return and readmissions, and working with partner countries toward border management and providing support for protection to people in need in different parts of the world. Continuing with developments at EU level, we saw how relevant are the efforts to step up effectiveness at external borders. In that context, the implementation of two distinct but interlinked processes continued that have both been underway since 2019. First of them is the implementation of the Frontex regulation, which aims to strengthen day-to-day cooperation and improve response capacity at the borders. The second is the implementation of the regulation on the interoperability of IT systems to connect all EU European databases on borders relevant to migration, security and justice, and to ensure that those systems communicate with each other so that information is accessible in a consolidated manner. The pandemic further underlined the importance of those two aspects. Resettlement was another area that was heavily affected by COVID-19. In the dedicated section of the EASO Asylum report, we describe how due to widespread travel restrictions, resettlement processes aiming to bring to Europe persons in need of protection from third countries were largely disrupted. To mitigate this, the Commission and Member States, with EASO's active contribution, worked towards maintaining some continuity of services, among others through remote interviews and dossier-based selections. The commitment to resettlement is clear, as also evident in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, where alternative and safe legal pathways to protection have a special place. The analysis of the EU-level developments in 2020 would not be complete without mentioning the crucial role of the Court of Justice of the European Union, in its role to ensure a harmonized interpretation and application of EU law. In 2020, the Court issued several judgments, further interpreting various provisions of the Common European Asylum System, guiding its practical implementation in a wide range of areas, from effective access, the provision of personal interviews, forms of protection, detention, non-discrimination of nationals and beneficiaries of international protection, family reunification, the return of third country nationals and relocations. You will find those cases described in detail both in EASO Asylum report and in EASO case law database. With that, we will now move on to the key statistical trends in asylum applications in 2020.
So good morning from my side. So I will be presenting some data, so bear with me, but it's important that we understand some of the numbers behind the asylum situation in 2020. So starting with asylum applications, in 2020, more or less 500,000 applications were lodged in the European Union, which, as we've already heard, was a drop of about a third compared to the year before. Here on the chart, you can see 2019 on the left and 2020 on the right, each showing monthly applications. And I think you'll agree the decline is pretty obvious. It's worth saying that doesn't mean that there are fewer people in need of international protection globally. Instead, it means that populations in need were subject to widespread travel restrictions imposed in response to the pandemic. Focusing on 2020 on the right, you can see that at the beginning of the year, in January and February, applications were actually increased compared to a year previously, somewhat driven by the situation at the Greek border with Turkey. And there's a section on that in the Asylum report. When the COVID-19 state of emergency was first announced halfway through March, borders were immediately closed and some asylum offices were even temporarily shut, resulting in a massive drop in the number of applications by 85% actually going into April and May. But as we've heard already, asylum offices reacted quickly and implemented measures to reopen offices and ensure access to the asylum procedure, while at the same time safeguarding the health of the staff and the applicants alike. Nevertheless, for the rest of 2020, applications remained at about 2/3 of previous levels, almost certainly underpinned by the widespread travel restrictions and reduced mobility on a global scale. Some 2/3 of all asylum applications were lodged in just 3 countries. That's Germany, France, and Spain. All of these countries received fewer applications for asylum, but the decline was more apparent in Greece, where only half as many applications were lodged in 2020 compared to the year before. This is all shown in the press pack in good detail and also in the report. However, some countries received more applications, and these included Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Croatia, Austria, all of which on the so-called Western Balkan route. One obvious exception was Hungary, where applications fell by the highest rate in all of Europe, down by 3/4 compared to the year before, mostly due to local policy changes. So on top of this graph, we can place, just for reference, a simple line to show the number of travel restrictions that were in place in the European Union. And you can see very clearly an inverse relationship between travel restrictions and asylum applications. In 2020, Syrians and Afghans lodged the most applications for asylum, followed by Venezuelans, Colombians, and Iraqis. When we ask ourselves who's applying for asylum in the EU, that's more or less unchanged between 2019 and 2020. However, all the main citizenships lodged far fewer applications compared to the year before, and we can see that easily by adding a shadow of the previous year onto the chart. Of course, this wasn't necessarily the case for all citizenships. In fact, some, such as Belarusians, actually lodged more applications in 2020 compared to the year before, despite the COVID situation. But if there's a citizenship you're particularly interested in, then I recommend having a look at the back of the report in the annexes, where you can see all of the raw data for yourselves. An interesting question is, where are these citizenships actually applying for asylum in the EU? And we can see that with the help of some of these pie charts. For example, we see that more than half of all Syrian applications and Iraqi applications were lodged in Germany. If your screen's big enough, you can see that in the dark blue part of the pie charts. Also, the vast majority of Venezuelans and Colombian applications were lodged in Spain, and there are trends for the other citizenships as well. So the last two slides that I presented have been asylum applications, who's applying for asylum and where, and these can be found in the report figure 4.1 and 4.3, alongside some quite detailed analysis, as well as looking at things like how many applications were lodged in each member state relative to population size and GDP and so forth.
We have now looked into the number and structure of asylum applications in 2020, and this sets the scene to mention one of the key trends in European national asylum systems, which was a strong focus on the early stages of the procedure. As an initial prerequisite, we need to mention that effective access to the asylum procedure implies that people seeking international protection are able to reach the authorities of a member state and are granted access to a fair and efficient process. Throughout 2020, civil society and European international organizations, including UNHCR and Fundamental Rights Agency, continued reporting on obstacles in that regard for persons in need of protection. To highlight the importance of effective access, together with the Council of Europe's Special Representative on Migration and Refugees, the Fundamental Rights Agency also published guidance on the key safeguards in European law related to border management. Keeping up with a trend that formed in previous years, EU plus countries kept focusing on centralizing the initial stages of the procedure. One example is the use of arrival centers, which allow for enhanced coordination among different actors involved in asylum and reception, enabling an early collection of information from applicants to be used in swift decision-making. This centralization also allows for enhanced coordination among different actors involved in asylum and reception. On the Dublin procedure, a decrease was noted in Dublin requests, corresponding to the overall decrease in the number of applications. Despite efforts by EU plus countries, COVID-19 related measures and travel restrictions affected the implementation of transfers, which dropped by half compared to 2019. A number of EU plus countries also focused on fast and efficient processing by prioritizing some categories of cases, concerning both manifestly founded and, most commonly, manifestly unfounded cases. To increase the efficiency and standardization, EU plus countries kept reviewing and updating their list of safe countries of origin, and they issued guidelines and instructions for the processing of applications by certain profiles. In the next slide, we will look into statistical trends concerning asylum decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, so despite the immense challenges associated with the pandemic, EU asylum authorities issued more than 500,000 first instance decisions in 2020, which is broadly comparable even with the year before, without the pandemic, and despite the fact for a couple of months during the first lockdown, many offices were temporarily closed. Of particular note, Greece and Spain issued really increased their decision making. Overall, just 5 EU plus countries issued more than 80% of all the first instance decisions. That was Germany, Spain, France, Greece and Italy. And correspondingly, most decisions were issued to nationals of Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan and Colombia. The graph on your screen shows the relationship between asylum applications in yellow and first instance decisions in dark blue. For technical reasons, there are usually more asylum applications than first instance decisions issued, but nevertheless, this was more or less reversed in 2020, where more decisions were issued than the applications. It's also important to consider the number of decisions issued in second and higher instances. These are applications in appeal and in review. These decisions, now shown in light blue in the bottom of the graph, decreased slightly in 2020. So moving on to recognition rates, this is an important topic. It refers to the proportion of asylum decisions that grant protection of some sort. Decisions can be issued in first instance by the asylum authorities themselves, usually against new decisions. But decisions can also be issued in second and higher instances, which are appeal and review. As it happens, recognition rates at both these levels remain stable between 2019 and 2020, but on this slide we'll mostly be looking at recognition rate at first instance. So overall, the recognition rate was 42% if we take into account all types of protection. But it's worth mentioning that about 10% of these positive decisions offered national forms of usually humanitarian protection. Now, these are not international protection per se, and they're not strictly standardized across member states. If we choose instead to think about EU-regulated types of protection, so that's refugee status and subsidiary protection, then the recognition rate was 31%. What I'm going to say now and what's in the report is looking at the overall recognition rate, which is 42%. So this column of blue circles represents all the first instance decisions that were issued to applicants from Afghanistan in 2020. Each one of these blue circles is a different member state. The size of the circle indicates the number of decisions that were issued to Afghans by that member state, and the placement of the circle on the vertical axis is the recognition rate. In other words, the proportion of the decisions which offered protection of some sort. At the top of the column, we have 2 small circles, which are 2 different member states, issuing few decisions to applicants from Afghanistan because they're small circles. But importantly, nearly all of those decisions were positive because the circles are high up on the graph near 100%. Conversely, there are 2 circles at the bottom, which are again 2 different member states also issuing few decisions to applicants from Afghanistan. But in this case, nearly all of the decisions were negative because the circles are close to the 0%. Finally, in the middle, we have a group of larger circles, which are most member states, which issued many decisions to applicants from Afghanistan, and the recognition rates were varying somewhere between 40 and, let's say, 70%. Now, some commentators might look at this chart and conclude that the member states issuing decisions are on vastly different criteria, whereas in fact applicants with different profiles and different protection needs are thought to be lodging applications in different member states. So that's important. Also, some media might have suggested that offering protection acts as a pull factor, encouraging more applicants to come and lodge applications. Would this be true, we'd expect to see the largest circles at the top of the chart. In other words, a high recognition rate will be attracting more applicants, but that's very rarely the case in any of EASO's analytical work or indeed in any academic study. So forgive me for taking my time to describe this chart, but now we have our eye in focus, so to speak. We can reveal the other citizenships and compare recognition rates and the extent to which they vary across the member states. So in some cases we see that indeed there are different profiles and different applications, different protection needs being distributed among the member states, but in other cases these are much more clumped together. I recommend reading this section and looking at figure 4.22 in the report and getting in touch if you have any further questions. So looking at pending cases now, so these are the number of cases which are open in the European Union and awaiting a decision. Indeed, as we've already heard, the number of open cases did drop by 20% in 2020, and that bears testament to the decision-making efforts made by the member states. But it needs to be said that there's still 750,000 open cases, which have not reduced more or less since the so-called refugee crisis in 2015 and 2016. Certainly the number of cases are much higher than before this so-called crisis. So there are several breakdowns on this graph, but today probably the best thing to look at is just the light blue at the top, which is the number of decisions which are awaiting a decision at higher instance in appeal or review, and then the two dark blue colours at the bottom, which are with the asylum authorities. The proportion between these two varies over the years, as you can see, but at the end of 2020 it was more or less 50-50. Correspondingly, we see that most of the pending cases were for Afghans, Syrians, Iraqis, and others.
In the previous point, we saw that the number of pending cases awaiting decisions remained high in the European Union. Also in the area of reception, pressure on reception systems remained high, despite the decrease in the number of applications. This can be partially attributed to the common phenomenon of the former applicants and beneficiaries staying in reception facilities beyond the end of the asylum procedure. Several EU+ countries continued with the reorganization of the reception system, mostly increasing the centralization of the first phases of reception, following the centralization of the first steps in the asylum procedure, as we have heard in one of the first slides. This allows for enhanced coordination among different actors involved in asylum and reception, since they operate in one location. As in other areas affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, the efforts of the EU countries focused on maintaining continuity of services under those extraordinary circumstances. It was not uncommon throughout the year to observe reduction of services, including, among others, in education and in training. While, for example, an option to attend schooling remotely may exist, it may be limited by lack of equipment and connectivity. Such possible disruption need to be effectively addressed, as they carry the risk of negative consequences in the long run, especially thinking of the prospects of integration of those individuals staying in the country. In addition, civil society and international organizations at times expressed very strong concerns about reception conditions in certain facilities, including, for example, overcrowding. Typically, such reports triggered multilateral efforts by national and European authorities to ameliorate the situation. To enhance the implementation and effectiveness of the reception component of the Common European Asylum System, also EASO in the past year developed its strategy on reception. The strategy aims to assist EU+ countries in further developing strong, resilient reception systems that offer adequate standards of living and well-being of people in reception, among others through set standards and indicators, guidance and practical tools. We will now move to a related aspect of asylum procedures that requires a lot of attention, namely that of children and applicants with special needs.
So in 2020, about 3% of all applications were lodged by unaccompanied minors. 90% of these unaccompanied minors were boys, 40% were from Afghanistan, and half of all of these applications were lodged in Germany, Greece, Austria or Belgium. More efforts are certainly needed in the EU to protect women and girls in the asylum procedure. Not only that, but LGBTI persons are subject to human rights abuses in many parts of the world and may be afraid to talk openly in the asylum procedure even. Finally, safeguards are in place to protect children in the asylum procedure from falling into the hands of human traffickers.
The Asylum report provides a detailed, comprehensive section related to developments concerning the situation of children and applicants with special needs, due to characteristics such as age, health condition, or personal situation. This slide indicates some of the key areas where developments were noted. Highlighting the importance of early identification and referral, a number of EU Plus countries updated their legislation, policy and guidance in 2020, implemented quality monitoring measures, or developed new vulnerability assessments for applicants with special procedural needs. Yet, effective early identification remains a challenge, especially in regards to vulnerabilities. They may not necessarily be visible or evident. This increases the risk of applicants with special needs not being catered to. EU Plus countries also continued their efforts to create and maintain specialized facilities to provide for applicants with special needs. As in other areas, despite efforts by competent authorities, the impact of COVID-19 was significant, at times hindering effective access to support services, including access to education for minors. As indicated in the infographic shared on the previous slide, a sensitive approach is needed for handling cases involving LGBTI applicants. In 2020, as in the years before, gender-related considerations fed into the update of guidance for the assessment of applications, for example, to explicitly assess whether a specific country is safe for LGBTI persons. In 2020, EASO continued to support practical cooperation on issues related to applicants with special needs, while mainstreaming aspects related to such applications in all its work. Among others, in 2020, EASO actively supported the relocation of unaccompanied minors from Greece to other EU Plus countries. This process continues in 2021. On that note, we would now like to offer a brief summary of the main findings of the report and where they place us in ongoing work and the way ahead. As presented earlier, the number of asylum applications lodged in EU Plus countries in 2020 dropped dramatically by 1/3 compared to 2019, with travel restrictions and lockdowns impeding the journey for many. However, as conflict, systematic human rights violations, political instability and economic hardship continue to trigger major developments worldwide, migratory flows into Europe seem likely to continue at a steady or increasing pace. Accordingly, the need for protection is likely to remain high in the years to come. The European Commission's Pact on Migration and Asylum, proposed in September 2020, is a fresh start on reinforcing solidarity and tackling challenges in a harmonized way. A big effort has been made to consider diverse perspective in building an inclusive and comprehensive migration and asylum architecture for Europe. Political will, inspired policy making and flexibility are in place to achieve a breakthrough. A number of arrangements have been put in place by EU Plus countries to respond effectively to emerging and persisting asylum-related pressures. While acknowledging the function of temporary ad hoc solutions in covering immediate needs, the transition towards long-term, sustainable frameworks will require improvements to provide quality reception conditions, timely provision of care, focus on integration of beneficiaries, and a dignified process of return for those who are not in need of protection. The judicial institutions at the EU and national levels continued to affirm their role in interpreting the EU asylum acquis. This role was further emphasized in 2020 when courts were called to assess new practices and measures that have been introduced by national authorities in a new reality driven by the global pandemic. EU Plus countries have taken important steps towards introducing technological innovations to increase automation in asylum procedures. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a significant new impetus to EU Plus countries to enhance the digitalization of processes, as they needed to adapt the working modalities to mitigate the risk of a health emergency. As work towards digitalization progresses, attention needs to be paid to issues such as data privacy, ensuring equitable access to digital services, and increasing trust on the new emerging technical solutions. The complex nature of asylum requires comprehensive solutions. In the year to come, coordinated action and the integration of expertise from different stakeholders will be key in developing a balanced approach, where the key question will be how and not if all stakeholders contribute. EASO, as the new agency for asylum, will continue to be an integral part of this broader framework to provide protection solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to briefly refer you to the Asylum report, which is currently available on our website. I would like to also briefly mention additional resources, a package of which was developed which synthesized information in different formats. In addition to the main report, you also have available on EASO website the extended executive summary. This is available in all EU+ languages and also a number of third country languages to expand the readership and make the findings available to third countries. Also, for some of you in the audience who might be currently working on the academic work, a detailed bibliography of all the sources which were consulted and cited is available. The sources are grouped by type of organization for easy navigation and reference. Another resource that you might be interested in is the National Asylum Developments Database, which presents all the legislative, institutional and policy changes related to asylum, which are referred to in our report. It is a powerful tool to search for information by country, year or type of development. Among other resources, we also have a package of statistical data, a searchable online database with data and the latest asylum trends, fact sheets with key indicators organized by country, and also a package of additional graphs and data visualizations. Without a doubt, the report and its accompanying resources will serve as a wealth of information in your work in 2021. On that note, beyond the 2020 findings, we also put together for this presentation some brief information on the key statistical trends and developments in 2021 to offer an overview of the most recent state of play. Teddy will now take us through key asylum trends.
Thank you. Yes. So the data that's been used in this asylum report has been taken from our friends and colleagues at Eurostat. So the data that goes into the report are official, validated national statistics. If you're interested in the asylum situation, you don't necessarily want to wait until this time next year. For our next asylum report, we encourage you to visit the EASO website, where we analyze our own data on a monthly basis. There's an interactive digital map of the world. You can click on any country, and you can see some of the graphs change quite nicely. Some of the topics that I've touched on today, we all have applications and decisions, recognition rates, pending cases. All of that is there for every nationality in the world. I saw some of the questions come up. I'm just jumping the gun slightly on repeated applications. And if your screen's big enough, you can see the dark blue chart there contains first time and repeated applications. So that's really the place to go. What I can say about 2021 is that applications remained at about 3/5 of the level prior to the pandemic. Decision making continued to be increased in the member states. The recognition rate was stable, and the pending cases are slowly coming down. This web page on the EASO website is updated every single month, and so this is recommended reading for everyone connected today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Regarding policy developments, naturally a lot of focus has been still on responding to the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. EU+ countries have systematically proceeded with the vaccination plans for applicants and the beneficiaries of protection. On this, EASO has launched an information collection and reporting process, publishing periodic situational updates on national vaccination plans for applicants and beneficiaries. In addition, a number of initiatives have been introduced or continued at the EU level with direct and indirect implications for asylum. Those included steps to further increase coordination on search and rescue operations, for example, through the first meeting of the European Contact Group on Search and Rescue. Continued efforts to enhance cooperation with third countries on return and readmission, and the issuance of 3 new EU strategies of issues of key concern. The new EU strategy on voluntary return and reintegration aims at strengthening the legal and operational framework for voluntary returns, improving the quality of return and reintegration programs, and establishing better links with development initiatives. The new EU strategy to combat trafficking in human beings focuses on preventing the crime, bringing traffickers to justice, and protecting and empowering victims. Last but not least, the new comprehensive EU strategy on the rights of the child proposes concrete actions to protect, promote, and fulfill children's rights, also in the context of asylum. Another important development is the proposed regulation on artificial intelligence, which also includes provisions for artificial intelligence systems used in migration, asylum, and in border control management. A particular emphasis is placed on the accuracy, non-discriminatory nature, and transparency of all the AI systems in those contexts. Of course, as has become evident in the previous parts of the presentation, moving ahead with the Pact on Migration and Asylum has broadly considered as a legislative priority. It has now been included in the common list of key legislative priorities of the European Parliament and the Council and Commission. And like mentioned this morning, we all at EASO await news on the outcome of the trilogue this morning.
Okay, thank you very much to the colleagues for running us through the main findings of the 2021 EASO Asylum report, and also not only providing an overview of course, last year, 2020, but also at the end, also some updates on the first part of this year, which of course is very interesting as well, because it's very timely. And so now we will pass on to the question and answer segment of our program. We've received a lot of questions. Some of them are up on your screens. You can see them on the Slido section of your screens. There's also many more in the, let's call it the waiting room. But I think we'll try to we'll see how many we can get through of the ones on the screen right now. And then if we have time, we can put some more up, just so we don't overcrowd the list of questions. And also, as Ms. Maczynska mentioned, of course, just to recall that you can find all the resources, the report itself, of course, but also the press pack, the executive summary, and a lot of other resources on our website. It's very, very easy to find if you go to our website. Okay, so let's move on to the first question. This is a question which was sent to us actually before by email, and you can see it up on the Slido app as well. And it is from Mr. Andrew Fallone from the Center for European Policy Studies. And this is a question addressed at the Commissioner, so at maybe Mr. Rașcanu can then answer. So the question is, with the accelerated examination procedures included in the amended proposal for applicants from nations with a Eurostat recognition rate lower than 20%, can you provide greater clarity regarding the specific category of persons due to a specific persecution ground who would be considered exempt from this accelerated examinations procedure? Would this exemption be based on individual vulnerability assessments to evaluate if unique aspects of a person's identity, such as their political party or sexual orientation, places them at risk of targeted persecution? So, Mr. Rașcanu, perhaps we can pass to you.
Thank you very much, Anis. Good morning again. And this is the first time I'm taking the floor. I would like to congratulate my colleagues from EASO from their presentations, and as well as for the report, which indeed I can only join the chorus of those speaking before me, that it's an excellent tool for policy making. Andrew, thank you very much for your question. Indeed, thank you very much for passing in advance. It's a kind of technical question, but it was excellent that we have received it a little bit in advance. I think the situation actually is quite simple, because as you know, the thing is that the Commission came with the proposal in 2016, and then the one in 2020 actually just amended the proposal from 2016. So basically, we have two proposals that should be read together. Now, the thing is that what is happening in such a situation is that you have to read the recital in 39A in corroboration with the Article 40 on the accelerated examination procedure from the 2016 proposal. And there you will see that there is a clause saying that in case the determining authority in the member states consider that the examination of the application involve issues of factual law that are complex to be examined under an accelerated examination procedure, it may continue the examination on the merits in accordance with the Article 34 and 37, basically looking at the merits of the case, if you want, in the normal procedure. Now, coming to the gist of your question about the two categories. Yes, I would agree with you. These are the kind of categories that makes the situation very complex. But I would not limit those situations only to those, because only to those two cases, because I think that's very much depending on what is happening in the country of origin. And that is something that for the case handler to assess, to look at what is happening in the countries of origin, to see what are the elements of, what are the agents of persecutions and what is the situation there, and then to apply that to the case at hand. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius, for that answer. Okay, so we can move on to the question that I have highlighted from Bernard Chiari. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. And the question reads, EASO provides COI and MedCOI reports as well as country guidance. Are there plans to develop or strengthen a forecast capability aiming not only at environments and structures in COI, but also at an early warning function with regard to key developments, leading to massive migration movements? So,
I just can start with one sentence, but then I will give the floor to Teddy. It's true that already now we do, of course, focus on COI and MedCOI, as mentioned, and also to the forecasting. This has been well, let's say, latest development in the agency, but I think it's quite an important part of work that this team is doing. And I think it's important for all of us, for the member states, but also for political, I would say, decision makers in Europe and even globally. So the forecasting, for sure, is one part of the future work that we will need to enhance still and dig more deeper into that. And I think that we will be much better off with the new regulation, because indeed, European Asylum Agency will have the possibility to enhance the information on MedCOI and on COI, but also on the country guidance, of course. And with that, we will try to also put much efforts into the forecasting and also into the early warning functionalities. But I will leave it more technically to Teddy, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so this is a good question. I mean, in the past we have seen rather sudden influxes of large numbers of third country nationals in need of international protection, and there's no doubt that in the past member states asylum authorities have been somewhat swamped with applications, and this is a concern for us because we want to make sure that every applicant has unencumbered access to an asylum procedure and a quick and a transparent and a fair process. So it's in everybody's best interest that there is some forewarning provided, and this is where the EASO early warning and forecasting system comes into play. For many years now we've been using big data, GDEL data on the conflict and disruptive events that take place in countries of origin and transit, Google Trends data. Really, we're downloading vast amounts of data every day, and we're using machine learning algorithms to sift through that. There's no personal data there at all, so we're not interested in the identity of anybody, but simply the numbers of possible movements, so that we can inform member states and let them know that applications may be on their way. It's a complicated system that we employ here, but I'd encourage anyone who has a certain interest to look at. We published an article in Migration Policy Practice last year, where the system is the EASO system at least is set out in some detail, and we also published a paper last year with IOM on migration from West Africa, and again the EASO early warning system is described there in detail as well. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Perhaps I'm just highlight this question. So this is a question from Jamie Bolling, director at Independent Living Institute. I have skimmed the report and see no mention of persons with disability, and wonder if you have taken this group into consideration in your work. I have read about persons with vulnerabilities. Perhaps Jadwiga.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question. I would like to draw the attention to our special dedicated section, section 5 in the report, which looks into different groups with special needs, including but not limited to children, where we mention different initiatives taken by member states with regard to vulnerable groups, including with persons of disability. While it is true there is no dedicated section concerning this group specifically, I believe we have covered a large number of developments, including also in particular with regard to reception, where member states took efforts to prevent the negative effects of the pandemic on this particular group, as well as in more general terms to develop strategies to be able to provide them with a better experience in the asylum procedure. So I would like to very much encourage you to read the report, this detailed section, and please revert back to us in case of further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jadwiga. And so I'm just trying to provide, to give like a diversity of different questions. So some are very technical, some are a bit overarching. So we have a bit of diversity here. So this is a question from Michael Williams. And the question is, will EASO or the EUAA work for harmonization of safe third country lists at EU level so that greater uniformity will prevail in the future?
Yes, thank you very much, and indeed, very relevant question. The truth is that, of course, the political decision needs to be taken on the level of EU by the co-legislators, namely the Parliament and, of course, the Council, to adopt the safe third country lists on the level of EU, and definitely with countries of origin information and all the information the EASO has and can provide, we can definitely do much to then achieve the greater uniformity within Europe. And I think that this question is relevant also because of the future discussions on the Pact on Migration, and especially in line with the border procedure and in line with the screening regulations. So I do hope, and our would say wish is that this would be the future development, and of course EASO can contribute much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now perhaps something a bit more technical, just highlighted. This was a popular question, there's 12 thumbs up on it. EASO's annual report, section 4.13, well covers statelessness, which is welcome, but understanding the issue is only the first step. How will EASO more strongly address this in its programming? Example, through screening, training, COI, etc., to ensure proper identification and protection of stateless refugees.
Thank you very much for this question, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank the European Network on Statelessness for the dedicated contribution to the report, much appreciated. Indeed, the information collection that we have been performing for the purpose of the Asylum report is also feeding into other areas of EASO's work. There are activities also to fully embrace issues of statelessness and the specific link with asylum procedures in EASO training activities by inclusion of this specific information in the various training modules developed by EASO. And we will be also working more closely on mapping different practices developed by member states to assess protection needs of stateless applicants and to try to identify any challenges that member states might be facing in that regard. It is important, I believe, to underline that statelessness and asylum are two separate, although very closely linked areas. So I think in that work of EASO, it would be very important to take into consideration also the pre-existing resources, such as offered by the European Network on Statelessness and also by the relevant work of the European Migration Network. So we will for sure take them into consideration when further developing our activities on addressing statelessness in the context of asylum.
Thank you, Jadwiga. Okay. Another popular question here. And the question is, I think this is addressed both to the Commission and then to us as well. Does the new Pact on Migration and Asylum take into account violence against women in the context of forced migration? And in general, EASO I suppose it's, does EASO use an intersectional length, discrimination based on sex, gender, race, ethnicity, etc., while analyzing the migration political agenda and its developments? This is a question from Claudia Di Matteo. So perhaps, Marius, maybe if you can start us off with something on that.
Yes, Anis, thank you very much. Thank you, Anis. I think it's a very interesting question indeed. And I can only say yes, indeed that's the case. But this is not only with the pact, because basically the Common European Asylum System, since its inception, took into account the vulnerabilities of the applicants and the victims of the trafficking, and are such kind of are included in such categories. So I think yes, indeed, how we do this by building safeguards into our system, so that we can look into the person and can proactively see whether the person are part of the vulnerability categories. So basically, this is happening. This determination is happening from the moment of the application is made throughout the procedure until the interview. And then we also look into the training of our staff. But I guess the EASO is doing an excellent job, and they will have much more than myself to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. I'm not sure if the colleagues want to add anything to that.
Maybe just to draw attention, indeed, to fully agree on the importance of those aspects, and to draw attention to a dedicated section. We have the Asylum report, which relates to the protection of women and girls, where we have gathered information on relevant developments, both internationally and specifically in member states, and also to the fact that a number of case law examples quoted in the report and also in EASO case law database relate to specific elements related to gender-specific persecution and violence against women. So I would like to warmly encourage you to look into those examples we are providing and those resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Jadwiga. Okay, so we have another question here from this question is from Alberto Neidhart from the European Policy Center, and it reads: "Thanks for the presentation and congratulations for the report." Thank you very much for that comment. What's the difference of recognition rates between first instance and second instance decisions in the EU overall? I did not see this in the slide. Is there a notable trend in this regard with respect to previous years, or are numbers stable? So Teddy, perhaps that's something you can answer.
Yes, of course. Okay, thanks for this question. Yeah, so the recognition rates were stable between 2019 and 2020, and this was surprising really, because because of the pandemic, different caseloads were often being processed when some of the asylum offices were temporarily closed. So in some member states, some of the older cases were processed, and in other member states, some of the newer cases were processed. So really the recognition rates at first and second instance, they did both vary quite a lot throughout the year, but they finished on a stable way, which is somewhat encouraging. So not only is there variation between the different member states, there's a lot of variation between the different citizenships as well. And the way that decisions are taken between first and second instance also rather varies depending on national legal systems. So rather than giving an overall figures, I recommend taking a look at in the reports where this is where these complexities, let's say, are challenged directly. And please get in touch if there are more questions on that.
Thank you very much, Teddy. Okay. Question here from Anonymous. How will you, so EASO, cooperate with UN agencies such as UNHCR and IOM in the future in the areas of resettlement, relocation, and reception? Perhaps you may answer that.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm quite happy and proud to say that we have ongoing and very strong relationship and also working arrangement with IOM and UNHCR. In this respect, I'm happy that when I joined EASO as the Executive Director in 2019, we've signed a new a working arrangement with Director General Vitorino with IOM, and also we have renewed our working arrangement with UNHCR this year. We have, of course, cooperation on 3 levels. So policy level, of course, theoretical, let's say, work in our working groups and methods, and of course also very operationally, we cooperate in all 3 areas that were mentioned in the question. So in resettlement, relocation, but also, of course, in reception and asylum procedures. We are all present, especially IOM, in all 5 member states where we work operationally. So namely, we cooperate our work in Italy, in Cyprus, Malta, Greece, and also in Spain now. And I have to say that this cooperation is really strong and is very relevant to us. We also do our work together in 3rd countries, where of course we as an agency have quite limited mandate, but still I think that we are well represented, and we do cooperate with both of the international organizations there too.
Thank you, Ms. Grigori. Let me clear that question. Okay, I have a question here related to COVID, so I think it would be interesting to also look at this question, because of course it's been a very unique year. And the question is from Federica Infantino from the Migration Policy Center at European University. What kinds of developments linked to the COVID-19 pandemic will continue to be used? And of course, as we've already heard, there have been a lot of developments over the past year. So I think this is an interesting question. Perhaps, I don't know who can address it, Jadwiga, and maybe also then we can pass to Marius as well if he wants to add something.
Thank you very much. This is an excellent question. I guess we're all excited about it, and we're all excited to see which of those developments will continue to be used. From the perspective of the Asylum report, I would say that definitely those new measures and those developments that have stood well the test of judicial scrutiny, since, as we tell you in the Asylum report, several of those solutions have been already examined and scrutinized by national courts. So it is important to understand this differentiation between ad hoc emergency solutions and those solutions that are solid and they can be used in a long term, in an efficient and in a fully in line with fundamental rights. Personally, I believe that there's a lot of promise in different technical solutions that have been elaborated, and they have, where the COVID pandemic in a way forced member states to make this technological leap to new solutions. I do believe that there is a big potential in retaining those, potentially not as a general kind of default solution, but to retain those technical solutions, enabling, for instance, remote interviewing or remote processing of cases for those categories of cases where this would actually provide added value. For example, for persons who might not be able to travel to the location where interviews would normally be organized. So I think that those developments that can be used in a targeted way, not because we are forced to use them by COVID, but because we choose to use them because they are more efficient, those technical developments have the highest chance to remain with us long term. I don't know if my colleagues would like to add anything on that.
Perhaps, Marius, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Well, just very short, actually, because I very much agree with Jadwiga, and I think she made all the right points. And I also think that it's also very good that the report is very clear on that one. And I really liked reading of this part, and also on the way forward about what is coming and how the things will be impacted in the future. Now, from my side, I think there are 2 points that I'd like to make. First of all, I think that those tools that prove their added value will continue to be used in the future, because it will not be appropriate just to drop them. It makes sense to use them as long as they have added value. But also there is a wider perspective in crisis management in general. And I think this was also touched upon by the commissioner before me. The thing is that the COVID showed the ability of our system to become resilient and to adapt. And that we managed that. And I think this kind of resilience that is built in the system would only prove very valuable in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius. Yes, indeed, it's these things are highlighted also in our press release as well, and also to recall that over the past more than 12 months, EASO has actually published a lot of guidance materials on for member states on how to adapt and be resilient in the pandemic. Okay, so let me clear that question. So I think this is an interesting one because it relates to, of course, convergence, which is an important goal of the CAS. It's by somebody anonymous. Oh no, it's by, sorry, Ingrid Eckerman from Sweden. How to handle that different countries have different views on who needs protection. The same person might get protection in one country and be rejected in another. So this is, of course, a very broad question, which can be addressed many ways. And Teddy also mentioned both nationalities of origin where there's convergence and also where there's not. So perhaps, I don't know, would you want to say something general, and then maybe Teddy can carry on?
Of course, yes. No, the convergence is the essence of common European asylum system. I think that we all agree to that. Of course, I mean, EASO is trying to, in a way, address this question for many years now. We do that through our practical work. I mean, throughout the training, of course, of the asylum experts around Europe. We have trained more than 50,000 of them in the last 10 years. And also, of course, we try to do that with our guidance and with our tools. I think that when we talk about Europe as a space of protection, the convergence always needs to be up front. We need to dig into that deeper, and I think that we have done much in the last couple of years. Also, of course, with significant help from the side of the member states. I think that they are well aware of this situation, and we've seen that especially for some particular nationalities, convergence is still quite big, as Teddy showed us in the presentation. And of course, as I said, the essence of common European asylum seeker is system is quite simple. When asylum seeker comes to Europe from an X country, of course, should be treated at the same objective, with the same objective criteria when he presents this individual story of asylum to him. So in this respect, of course, we do hope that we will do much more still in the future with our work. And I also think that with the new proposals from the Commission, from the Pact, this is going to be possible. I will give the floor to Teddy here, please.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, all I would say is I think that we would be hard-pressed to find another region of the world where decisions are taken as consistently as they are already in the European Union. You know, we base the decision-making on our shared values, and there's already a lot of consistency. Some of the charts which I showed perhaps focused on situations where the decision-making is a little bit divergent, because that's where we focus our efforts. You know, supported by EASO, the member states are, and even within individual member states, the decision-making slowly becomes more and more consistent. But we should also remember that every asylum application is individual and often very, very complicated, and the situation in countries of origin and transit, they're changing on a daily basis as well. So there are considerable challenges involved here. Everything is a moving target, and we just need to make sure that the decisions are made fairly, transparently, and of course as consistently as possible. And you know, this is our daily bread. So thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, both Ms. Gregori and Mr. Wilkins. So we're actually running out of time, and I think we'll take note for next year to perhaps put more time for questions and answers, because I know it's, of course, appreciated, a good opportunity for the audience to get some insights. So we'll take one more question, and please rest assured that we have taken note of all the questions that have been asked. There's a lot of them also in the waiting room, which I didn't put on the board simply because we're running out of time. And we will, of course, pass those. We will answer those in writing in the coming days, so they won't be forgotten. Okay, so the last question. This is an interesting question from Rom Leukovic, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, from the City University of New York. Okay. Do you have data on what rate of the 2020 asylum applicants arrived irregularly versus regularly? And yes.
Yes, It's a very interesting and very good question indeed, because it's sometimes this is miscomprehended, if I say, and I use the words. What the data is, we do have, of course, and it's quite accurate. Still, we will have more information if and when, of course, Eurodac is going to be adopted. Then we will have the possibility really to have the overall look at the situation in Europe, and we will be also able to compare the data amongst ourselves between, of course, different institutions that collect data. So this kind of interoperability that we would wish for still does not exist in Europe, and still we're still counting basically files and not asylum seekers. But with the numbers, you will be surprised that indeed we have the ratio between, of course, irregular arrivals to Europe and the applications lodged, and the ratio is always almost 1/3 of irregular arrivals in comparison to overall number of the asylum seekers in Europe. But for 2020, please, Teddy, you can conclude that.
Thank you. Yes, this is always an interesting question, but ferociously complicated to try and answer. I think it's worth pointing out and reminding the audience that everyone has a right to apply for asylum, irrespective of how they've arrived in the European Union. This is something that that we feel is incredibly important. And Nina's absolutely right. You know, once the interoperability regulation comes in, then some of the data will be a little bit more joined up, and we'll be able to look at somewhat the travel histories of the applicants at the end of the year, without looking at the personal data. We'll know exactly how many were detected at the external border, for example, and how many were issued visa before applying for asylum. So this is something that's coming in. However, you know, when we look at previous years, we see that around 25% of asylum applications were lodged by applicants who come from visa-free countries. So those are individuals that would have the right to arrive in the European Union without a visa by regular means. And indeed, asylum in the European Union is underpinned both by regular and by irregular migration in this respect. But during 2020, this changed rather dramatically. And so I'd recommend looking at figure 4.4 in the report, in the analysis that goes with that, where we're looking at irregular and regular arrivals and how these underpinned the applications that were lodged last year. This is very difficult for us to do with the data that's currently available, but watch this space. In the future we'll have a much better overview in this respect. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is all we have time for today. As I said, we've taken good note of your questions, many questions which have been sent. Also, if you have further questions, you can send them to info@easo.europa.eu, or for journalists to press@easo.europa.eu, and those addresses will be on the screen shortly when we sign off. I want to thank the panel for joining today for this successful launch of the Asylum report. It's very clear also from the attendance how important this go-to resource has become for all policymakers and academics and anybody interested in the asylum picture of the EU. I also want to thank the Commissioner again on behalf of everybody at EASO for taking the time to record those kind words and give those insights that we screened earlier in the program. And of course, to thank Mr. Michael Ribbenvik, the chair of the Management Board, once again for joining us and for his introductory comments. And of course, Marcus Raskanu for representing the Commission with us this morning. So I wish you all a good rest of the day. And again, you can find all the resources, the report, and other resources attached to it on our website. So feel free to go to our website and consult them. Thank you and have a good rest of the day.